The phone rang in the quiet room, its shrill sound echoing through the empty apartment. Sarah froze, her hand hovering just above the receiver, heart pounding in her chest. It was nearly midnight. She wasn't expecting a call. It was a call she never thought she'd have to take. Her breath caught as the voice on the other end spoke her name. His name was the one she had long associated with comfort, with love. But tonight, it sounded different. Cold. Distant. And then, the words came, slicing through the silence. I saw him, with her. Her grip tightened on the phone as the words settled in her mind. Was this a joke? No, it wasn't. Her world was about to shift in ways she couldn't possibly prepare for. In that moment, everything in her life felt uncertain. Was it all a lie? The sweet memories, the trust, the love. Her mind raced as the room around her began to feel smaller, her thoughts louder. It was like the walls were closing in, and the shadows from the streetlight outside stretched long, twisting, reaching into her space. The ringing in her ears made it harder to think, the room suddenly too still, too cold. She could feel the shift happening in her chest, a heaviness that was impossible to ignore. What was she supposed to do with this new knowledge? Sarah's breath was shallow as she set the phone down, the line going dead. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying to grasp what had just been said. I saw him with her. The words repeated in her mind like an incessant drumbeat. The silence in the apartment felt suffocating. Sarah's heart raced, but there was no escape. She stood up, pacing the room, each step a testament to her inner turmoil. She thought about the years with James, their plans, their love, their promise to always be honest. Had it all been a facade? A lie? The narrative of her life began to unravel before her eyes. She could feel her chest tighten, her thoughts swirling in a storm of uncertainty and disbelief. This wasn't the person she knew, the man she trusted with her whole heart. The truth had shattered that image, and all that was left was the raw sting of betrayal. She grabbed the keys from the counter, her decision clear, though still clouded by fear. She wasn't just going to sit here and wonder. She had to find out the truth for herself. She wasn't sure what she was about to face, but she knew she couldn't back down now. She arrived at the address within 20 minutes. The street was dark, deserted, the only noise being the faint hum of the city in the distance. She stood at the foot of the steps leading up to the door, her heartbeat in her ears. The house seemed normal enough, but everything felt wrong. Her stomach churned, the gnawing doubt clawing at her. She rang the bell. Seconds later, the door opened, revealing a stranger. Tall, with a cold expression. Sarah swallowed, her mind racing. She didn't recognize him, but she had to ask. I'm looking for James. Is he here? Her voice was steadier than she felt, though her hands were still shaking. The man hesitated, his eyes flickering with something she couldn't place. Finally, he stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. The air inside the house was stale, and the silence was suffocating. Sarah stepped in, her mind on edge, every fiber of her being telling her that this was the moment when everything changed. Then, she saw him. James. Standing in the dim light, his eyes wide with shock. James stood there, frozen in place, as Sarah's mind raced. His eyes darted to the stranger behind her, then quickly back to her, as if trying to make sense of the sudden intrusion. Sarah's chest tightened, but she refused to break eye contact. The silence was deafening, hanging thick in the air. It was no longer the man she had once shared her life with. He was a stranger now, caught in the web of his lies. Sarah's breath came in shallow gasps as she forced herself to speak, her voice steady but trembling with the weight of the moment. I need to know, James. Tell me the truth. She could feel the coldness in the room, seeping into her skin, mixing with the dread swirling in her stomach. There was no turning back now. His silence answered more than words ever could. The betrayal was real. James finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Sarah, I. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. She shook her head, her thoughts crashing over one another. Every memory they had built together seemed tainted now. The dinners, the quiet nights, the laughter, was it all a performance? Had she been nothing more than a fool in this act? Her mind flashed back to earlier moments. The way James had become distant, the sudden late nights at work, the secretive phone calls. It all made sense now, a puzzle piecing itself together with every passing second. Sarah swallowed hard, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. There was no going back, no erasing the image of him with someone else. The words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating any possibility of resolution. James reached out, his hand trembling, but Sarah stepped back, her eyes hardening. She couldn't let him touch her, not after everything. The stranger behind Sarah, watching the scene unfold with cold detachment, shifted his weight, his eyes narrowing as if he was preparing to intervene. He'd been quiet until now, but his presence felt like an unspoken challenge. "What do you want, Sarah?" James asked quietly, his voice breaking through the tension. "I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Sarah's gaze flickered between James and the stranger. Her mind raced. There was something more here, something she couldn't yet see. The stranger knew more than he was letting on. She turned to him, meeting his gaze with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. "Who are you? Why are you here?" The stranger hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a low, measured tone. "I know what you're going through, Sarah. I've been on the other side of this. But you don't have to face it alone. There's more to the story than you realize." His words hung in the air, like an invitation to something darker, something she didn't yet understand. But the offer of an ally was tempting. She couldn't face James alone, not with the crushing weight of betrayal on her shoulders. Without another word, Sarah made her choice. She nodded, a silent agreement to whatever this stranger had to offer. As Sarah's decision settled into her bones, so did the realization that she was no longer the same person who had walked into this house hours ago. The truth had already started to consume her, but it was the next step, joining forces with the stranger, that truly changed everything. Sarah sat at the small, round table with the stranger, her hands folded in front of her, her mind racing. He spoke with quiet authority, telling her things she wasn't ready to hear. About James, about his deceit, about the darkness lurking just beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life. But the cost of all this knowledge was steep. She could feel herself losing control, slipping further into a world of shadows and lies. Each revelation felt like a weight, dragging her deeper into a pit she couldn't claw her way out of. The walls around her were closing in once again. James's absence in the room was a sharp contrast to his earlier presence. His guilt still lingered in the air, a thick fog of regret. But it was too late for him to apologize. Too late to explain. He had sealed his fate when he chose to betray her. Sarah's eyes darted back to the stranger, whose motives were still unclear. She had no choice but to trust him now. But what price would she pay for that trust? The days blurred into one another as Sarah ventured deeper into the web of secrets surrounding James. The stranger had given her details, fragments that didn't quite add up, but they hinted at something darker. It wasn't just an affair. It was an entire life that had been hidden from her, a web of deceit that stretched far beyond her understanding. One evening, she found herself standing before a small, unmarked door, her hand hovering above the handle. Inside, the stranger had promised to show her the final piece of the puzzle. With a deep breath, she turned the handle, the door creaking open. What she saw was beyond her wildest fears. On the walls were photos of James. Not the man she had loved, but the man who had lied, cheated, and lived a double life. There were pictures of him with someone else, but it was more than that. There were notes written in his own hand describing their meetings, their plans, and their lies. The betrayal was no longer an abstract concept. It had a face, a form, a plan. The man she had known, the man she thought she loved, was someone she no longer recognized. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in on her as the weight of the truth settled like a stone in her chest. Her breath quickened. The stranger stood behind her, silent, watching her absorb the destruction of her world. And then, in the stillness, a realization hit her like a thunderclap: she was no longer just a victim. This was her fight now. And she would do whatever it took to reclaim her life. The weight of the revelation pressed down on Sarah like a suffocating blanket. Every moment with James, every shared laugh, every quiet evening now felt like a lie. The betrayal she had uncovered was more than just an affair, it was a systematic deception that spanned years. But amidst the chaos of emotions, Sarah's mind clung to one thought: revenge. The stranger had been right. She could no longer remain passive in this. She couldn't just walk away and pretend that this never happened. But what was the cost of confronting James? What would it take to expose him for the man he really was? She sat in the small, dimly lit room, her thoughts swirling in a maelstrom. There was a moment, a single fleeting moment, where everything could change. Would she take the truth and confront James, expose him to the world, to herself? Or would she play along, pretend like she didn't know, and continue living in the lie? As the stranger watched her, his face unreadable, Sarah knew one thing for sure: she couldn't walk away without facing him. She had to know the full extent of his betrayal. She had to make him answer for the life he had stolen from her. But as the door to her confrontation loomed larger, so did the cost of the choice she was about to make. Sarah made her choice. She would confront James, but not just with words. No, she would take control of the situation, expose him for the man he was, and make him see what he had done to her. This wasn't just about closure anymore, it was about reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her peace. The walk to James's house felt like a lifetime. Each step was heavy with the weight of her decision. She could feel the pulse of her own heartbeat in her throat as she approached the door, the world around her feeling distant, like she was walking through a dream. When she finally rang the bell, her hand didn't tremble. She was done with fear, done with second-guessing herself. James would answer for what he had done, not just to her, but to the life they had shared. As the door opened, and she saw his face, his expression still the one she had loved but now completely foreign, she stepped forward. No hesitation. No turning back. This was the moment that defined everything. Sarah stood at the threshold of James's house, the door now closed behind her. The air between them was thick, charged with an emotion she couldn't quite place: fear, anger, perhaps something darker. She had come here with only one purpose: to force him to confront the life he had built on lies. Yet, in the few moments before she spoke, before the storm would break loose, a strange calm settled over her. For the first time in days, she was clear-headed. The weight of betrayal that had consumed her was now a distant echo, muffled by the sharp clarity of her decision. This was it. She wasn't walking away this time. She could feel the presence of the stranger behind her, his shadow a constant reminder of the path she had chosen. He was waiting, patient, observing. She hadn't realized until now just how much his quiet manipulation had shaped her course. But right now, it was James who stood before her, and he would answer. Sarah took a deep breath and turned to face him. He was standing just inside, his face pale, his eyes betraying a blend of guilt and fear. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Sarah, please, let me explain." She didn't respond. Her silence was enough. It was time to take control. The word Sarah had been holding back for days finally escaped her lips. "I know everything, James. I know about her. I know about the lies. I know about everything you've done." James flinched as if each word struck him physically. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He couldn't deny it anymore. Sarah saw the flicker of realization in his eyes. He understood that there was no way out. But Sarah didn't stop. She pressed on, her voice steady but filled with an intensity that surprised even her. "You destroyed everything. You destroyed us. All for what? For someone else. The tension in the room was palpable. Each word she spoke seemed to cut deeper than the last. Sarah could see the sweat forming on James's brow, the way his hands shook as they gripped the edge of the table. She was no longer the woman who had been in love with him. She had transformed into something sharper, colder. This confrontation wasn't about seeking closure. It was about reclaiming her power, her autonomy. The longer the silence stretched between them, the more Sarah could see the truth in his eyes. He wasn't sorry. He was scared. Scared of losing everything he had built, scared of what she might do next. But she wasn't scared anymore. The confrontation escalated quickly, reaching a boiling point Sarah had never anticipated. She had prepared herself for anger, for tears, but nothing could have prepared her for what came next. James broke. His composure shattered, and for the first time in the entire exchange, he spoke the words she had longed to hear. "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. But it did. And now, it's too late." Sarah's heart wavered, but she held her ground. She couldn't let him manipulate her anymore. Not with his words, not with his remorse. But then, something unexpected happened. James stepped forward, closer than he had been all evening, his eyes pleading. "Sarah, please. I can't lose you. I'll do anything. I'll make it right." And there, in that moment, Sarah was forced to make the hardest decision of her life. The past had been stolen from her, and the future was uncertain. But she had to make a choice. She could let him back into her life. Forgive him. Or she could walk away, leaving him in the past where he belonged. It was her decision. And it would shape the rest of her life. With a final, steadying breath, Sarah spoke the words that would sever the final tie between them. "No. It's too late." She turned, her heart pounding in her chest, and walked out the door. The weight of the sacrifice was immense. But in that moment, she understood that reclaiming her life meant letting go of the past. Sarah didn't look back. As she walked away from James, the weight of the night began to settle on her shoulders like a heavy fog. Each step away from his house felt like a small victory, but it didn't erase the scars left by everything she had uncovered. The city around her was still, almost too quiet, as if holding its breath in the wake of the storm she had just weathered. The first few minutes were the hardest, her thoughts a whirlwind of regret, anger, and disbelief. What had she done? Was it really the right choice to walk away from everything she had known? The future that once seemed so certain now felt like an empty void. But then, as the night pressed on and the hours passed, a strange clarity began to emerge. She hadn't just walked away from James. She had walked away from the lie that had defined her life for so long. The illusion of their perfect relationship was shattered, and in its place was the truth. It wasn't the closure she had expected, nor the easy resolution. It was raw. It was painful. But it was real. And real was enough. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah allowed herself to breathe. The weight that had burdened her chest was slowly lifting. Days passed, and the world began to feel different. Sarah's apartment, once a place of memories she couldn't escape, now felt like a sanctuary. The walls were no longer filled with echoes of James's presence. The silence that once felt oppressive now gave her the space to think, to breathe, to heal. She had made her choice, and it was one she didn't regret. The hurt lingered, yes. But in the quiet moments, in the solitude, she began to rediscover herself. She remembered the woman she had been before James, the one who had dreams, ambitions, and a life full of possibility. Her friends, those who had remained by her side through everything, now stepped forward. They offered support, laughter, and a reminder that life would continue, with or without him. The weight of the past, though still present, began to fade. It was no longer the center of her universe. Sarah learned to walk again, slowly at first, then with more confidence. The pieces of her life were scattered, but she began to put them back together, piece by piece. She was no longer defined by the betrayal or the lies. She was Sarah, the woman who had survived, who had chosen herself over everything else. And that was enough. Weeks later, Sarah found herself walking down the same street where she had once confronted James. The memory was still sharp in her mind, but it no longer stung. It had faded into the background, a part of her past that had helped shape her, but no longer controlled her. She passed the house where it had all ended, but this time, she didn't feel the rush of anger or hurt. Instead, she felt a quiet sense of acceptance. The house was just a building now, nothing more. The memories of James, of the life they had once shared, still existed, but they were no longer the lens through which she saw the world. Sarah had moved beyond that. The broken pieces had been picked up, and she had rebuilt herself. As she walked on, the faint sound of a bird chirping in the distance filled the air, a soft, familiar noise that reminded her of the simplicity of life, of moving forward, one step at a time. The final echo of the life she had lost was fading away, leaving behind the quiet piece of a future that was entirely hers to shape.